CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Europe, live from CGTN in London. I'm Robin Dwyer.
And I'm Paul Barber. Our top stories. The Taliban prepares to announce its new government as fighting intensifies in the rebel Panjshir Valley.
Japan loses its leader. Yoshihide Suga says he will step down as Prime Minister as his approval rating hits rock bottom.
A shock from the US job market. New employment figures fall far short of expectations, sending the Dow into the red.
And the DAX gets an overhaul. Germany's index expands from 30 stocks to 40. Details of Afghanistan's new Taliban government are due to be announced shortly. The co-founder of the Islamist group, Mullah Baradar, is expected to head up the new administration, joined by other senior clerical and military figures.
Well, the Taliban had promised a new, more inclusive government once back in power, but the group is continuing to face armed resistance in the northern Panjshir Valley from fighters loyal to the former president, Ashraf Ghani. In the cities of Kabul and Herat, women have held public demonstrations demanding the right to work and study under Taliban rule. Let's go live now to Kabul and Zamaralai Abbasin. So, what are we expecting to hear about this new government, Zamaralai?
Hello, Paul. Well, nowadays the modification and description and also a lot of discussions about the inclusive government that everybody mesmerizing is emerging. Let me clarify, Paul. The Taliban administration have already clarified things. My information say there would be 3 layers of the upcoming government. First layer is the supreme leader of Taliban, Mullah Hibatullah Khan, who will be leading everything behind the curtains. And the second layer is the top leaders of Taliban. No matter Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar or any top leader of Taliban, he will be in charge of taking control of everything and the framework of the government. The third layer is the ministerial level and also all the administration that would be appointed. According to the information I've got already, the system will be of the Taliban leaders and the political parties and everybody, but the Taliban see other parties as inclusive as possible, but the merit is something that Taliban want to focus. The other part of the scenario is they won't share any power with any side, any party, or any ethnical groups in Afghanistan. And also the technocrats have their own place in the administration that would be established possibly next week and will be announced by the Taliban. So this is the whole structure, and in details there are much more, but the decisions, the priorities and the main power of the government would be with the Taliban. That's how the leadership was always important for the Taliban. Let's shortly take a look to the Doha Agreement. When there is 3 sections, the third one is 2 last parts of the third part of the agreement says the new Islamic State, which described very clearly. So it's on the verge of establishment because some part was also already vanished and shattered, like intra-Afghan negotiation. Now they have engaged in a different part with former President Hamid Karzai. Dr. Abdullah and Gulbuddin Hekmatyar is a new consul. So there are things coming up, but the discussion is now, at the moment I'm talking with you, about the individuals, about those who will be appointed to the ministerial levels and else. The rest all set. Paul.
Zamaralai Abbasin in Kabul. Many thanks indeed.
The European Union says it will engage with the Taliban, but will not recognise it as the Afghan government. EU foreign ministers have been meeting to agree a coordinated approach on the Taliban and the refugee crisis after the takeover of Afghanistan. Let's talk now to Tony Waterman, who joins us from Brussels. So, Tony, tell us more about the EU's stance on the Taliban.
Well, Europe says that it is going to talk with the Taliban, but it's going to be done under these very, very strict conditions. And they are drawing the line under recognize the Taliban as a legitimate government. The EU foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, said that the level of engagement is really going to depend on a raft of benchmarks and on the Taliban's behavior. So among those benchmarks is the respect for human rights, particularly when it comes to women's rights and media freedom. Also ensuring that Afghanistan does not become a safe haven or an exporter of terrorism. They also want to see this new government be inclusive and representative of the population, and they want to make sure that Afghans have access to humanitarian aid. Another thing that they would like to see is for the resumption of these evacuations when it comes to foreign nationals and also those local Afghans on the ground that are considered to be at risk because they had worked with Western allies over the past 20 years. To facilitate these talks and to, quite frankly, keep tabs on the Taliban and to see whether or not they're meeting these benchmarks, Josep Borrell said they want to reestablish a presence in Kabul if the security situation allows for that. We have no timeline on when this presence could be reestablished or what exactly it will look like, but this is quite significant because even if Europe does not recognize the Taliban government, having a presence on the ground there for some people is going to legitimize the Taliban and could, there's a risk that it could be used for propaganda purposes. Take a listen, though, to what Josep Borrell had to say earlier today.
I've been tasked by the Council on coordinating the contacts with the with the new government in Afghanistan, including with a joint EU presence in Kabul, coordinated by the External Action Service, if the security conditions allow for it. From there, we should support the departure of nationals, European nationals that are still there, and Afghans at risk that could be received in European Union member states as decided by them.
So, Tony, also being discussed a possible Afghan refugee influx. Is the EU prepared for it, though?
No, they're not really prepared for it, Robin. In fact, they seem more prepared to pull out all the stops to prevent that from even happening. There's reportedly this $700 million humanitarian aid package that the Commission is putting together that would go out to Afghanistan's neighbors, so that money could be used towards hosting and feeding and accepting these refugees so they never embark on this often very dangerous trek to Europe to begin with. That money would go to places like Pakistan, which we know was already hosting a large number of these Afghan refugees, but also places like Uzbekistan, maybe even to Iran, which is under international sanctions. If that did happen, that would just be an indication of just how desperate Europe is to make sure that Afghan refugees do not come knocking on their own doors. Borrell said that they want to create what he's calling a regional political platform to really stabilize the entire region. And he is, in fact, traveling over that way next week, where we assume that he is going to be talking about this. But it's really this dire humanitarian situation that we're seeing unfolding on the ground that has Europe so nervous because they're afraid that it could then trigger a mass exodus of refugees. And they're very desperate to avoid a repeat of that 2015 refugee crisis when we saw more than 1 million people enter into Europe, a lot of them from war-torn Syria, from other places as well. This is their worst-case scenario, and they're willing to throw a lot of money at this to ensure that that doesn't happen again.
Tony Waterman in Brussels, thanks very much.
The UK's Foreign Secretary has arrived in Pakistan. Dominic Raab is there for talks on securing the future of Afghans who've fled to neighbouring countries since the Taliban takeover.
He's promised a multi-million-dollar aid package to help nations affected by the refugee influx. Well, CGTN's Nicole Johnson joins us now in the studio. So, Nicole, what is the main aim of Dominic Raab's trip to Pakistan?
Well, as you said, essentially he wants to try and guarantee that safe passage of people out of Afghanistan into the UK. And by that we mean British nationals as well as any Afghans who have any links to the UK. So they've already got 13,000 people out. That includes 8,000 Afghanis and their families who worked for the British government and for British forces. They want to show their support and solidarity with the Pakistanis, and a large part of that comes in financial support. So $55 million has been pledged to help neighbouring countries who are going to be under pressure from this refugee crisis. Another $20 million for the UN and $27 million, interestingly, for processing centres. So clearly the longer-term plan for the UK is to try and set up processing centres in these countries, you know, get the visa process underway to then move them on to the UK. Now, the Foreign Secretary made it very clear that the UK is taking a pragmatic approach here. It's not recognising the Afghan Taliban, but it's certainly being forced to accept the reality on the ground. And let's take a listen to what he had to say.
The approach that we're taking is we don't recognise the Taliban as a government. Actually, the UK doesn't engage in the practice of recognising governments as opposed to states. But we do see the importance of being able to engage and have a direct line of communication.
Well, Nicole, in that press conference, we also heard from Pakistan's foreign minister, didn't we? What are his country's biggest concerns about the numbers of refugees?
Yes, Shah Mahmood Qureshi was right up there with Dominic Raab. And as you said, the big problem is those refugee numbers. And it's a great deal of pressure is really coming onto the borders right now. Pakistan is concerned that there's going to be an influx of Afghans. It already has more than 3 million Afghans in the country. Over the last 10 years, it's been gradually trying to resettle them back into Afghanistan, and it's concerned about seeing a repeat of what happened sort of 30, 40 years ago with long-term settled Afghanis basically becoming permanent Pakistani citizens. It's already closed its second most important border crossing, Spin Boldak in the north. There's a great deal of pressure on the Torkham crossing, which is between Peshawar and Jalalabad. That's a crossing I've been to in the past, and even under normal circumstances, there are thousands of people there. Right now, it's tens of thousands of people. So the access there has been severely restricted. And again, the Pakistanis, like the UK, emphasise that they have to accept the reality on the ground as well. They have commercial interests, trade, and so they said that they just have to accept it, essentially. Let's have a listen to what the Foreign Minister had to say.
After 40 years, there is a real opportunity for peace. So if there's anyone who is advocating peace and stability, it's, in Taliban is a friend, and we will work with that reality.
So Pakistan is going to be a major player in the events in Afghanistan. One of the major issues for it will be it's going to face a great deal of pressure from the United States, from the Biden administration, to try and crack down on terrorist extremist groups like ISIS-K, like Al-Qaeda. And I would expect that over the next sort of few weeks and months, we will see that Pakistan becomes the major humanitarian corridor into Afghanistan.
Nicole Johnston, thank you very much indeed.
China is paying close attention as a new Afghan government is formed. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin says the country's embassy in Afghanistan is an important channel for exchanges between the two countries and is operating normally.
China sincerely hopes all parties in Afghanistan will follow the will of the people, as well as to be aware of the hopes of the international community. To ensure a peaceful transition of power, it is necessary to solve differences through negotiation. Only then can the residents of war-torn Afghanistan recover from chaos and a lasting peace be reached.
The White House has shifted its focus from Afghanistan to the damage and destruction caused by Hurricane Ida. At least 46 people were killed across 4 states as flash flooding and tornadoes hit the northeast. President Biden is on his way to Louisiana, where another 9 deaths have been reported. Live now to Caroline Malone in Washington. Caroline, what can you tell us about President Biden's visit?
Well, that's right. President Biden is visiting Louisiana today to see that damage caused by Hurricane Ida. And there is a lot of devastation, with about 1 million people left without power, another 600,000 without water. And at the moment, there are hot and humid conditions there. So Biden is actually going to be touring some of the neighborhoods that are worst hit. Some are 60 kilometers west of New Orleans, and he's also going to take an aerial tour of other hard-hit communities. He's going to meet with officials such as the Louisiana governor, John Bell Edwards, who's likely to actually ask him for support getting things like fuel. I mean, the area's refining capacity was actually knocked out in the storm. Biden is due to speak again later today after he's had these tours. And his message on Thursday to the people affected was, "We are all in this together and the nation is here to help."
Many people, Caroline, saying that the tail of this storm is what caused the most harm. What's the latest now across the northeast?
Well, that's right. There are actually more than 4 million people still in areas under flood warnings in the northeast as those recovery efforts continue. Ida is actually the 5th most powerful hurricane to come ashore in the US, and it dumped heavy rain more than 1,600 kilometers away from actually where it made landfall. So we're talking about parts of New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Connecticut. And some regions actually had more rainfall in a few hours than they normally would over an entire month. Manhattan Central Park, for instance, saw the most amount of rainfall in an hour than it had before. And sadly, in those extreme conditions, people did die, particularly from floodwaters in both their homes and in cars. Well, political leaders are saying they see this as the new normal of conditions, and there needs to be better evacuation plans for the future and work on infrastructure. I mean, the public transport system was hit particularly hard in the Northeast and in New York. And the New York governor, Kathy Hochul, is saying the part of making sure this doesn't happen again is, of course, combating climate change. Climate experts have said warmer weather, warmer air holds more moisture, meaning more rain, and global warming is definitely making these conditions worse.
Caroline Malone in DC. Many thanks.
Japan is preparing for a shock leadership contest after Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga said he will stand down as party leader just 1 year after assuming office. Suga's approval rating has dropped to a record low as the country grapples with its most severe wave of the pandemic. Professor Seijiro Takeshita of Shizuoka University told me the announcement came out of the blue.
Well, I think it caught everybody by surprise. It was only 2 weeks ago where Mr. Suga was making it very clear that he's going to have a reshuffling of cabinet, et cetera, et cetera. So obviously, most people thought that he would be up and running and fighting for the seat again.
So can his departure be put down purely to the Japanese response to coronavirus, or are there other factors at play?
I would say it is mostly this coronavirus factor. You can see that, when he became the prime minister, he had the 3rd highest rating at 73% support level. But now it's gone down to 29, and you can see a very clear inverse relationship with his popularity and the rise of the COVID-19 cases in Japan. So obviously, his lack of popularity is basically due to the fact that the handling of the whole matter has been met with a lot of frustration, anxiety amongst the Japanese public.
So what will the new Prime Minister have to do to win over public opinion?
Firstly, reduce the amount of anxiety. And that's not going to be easy, considering the fact that Japanese have the highest level of risk avoidant tendency. And also due to the fact that, there are no Japanese manufacturers of the vaccines, and we still lag behind other OECD nations in level of vaccine takers. So there's a mounting amount of problems that we're seeing right now, especially with the spread of this variant type of Delta COVID-19 that's spreading right now at an accelerating pace. And we're getting a lot of alarm situation, which we saw earlier in the United States and the rest of the world. Unfortunately, the situation is not easy to turn around, whoever becomes a prime minister.
And what might this sudden departure mean for stability in the region?
Not very good. I mean, one of the negative things about, the Japanese prime ministership until Mr. Abe took over was the fact that we had a revolving door of prime ministers in Japan, which certainly is very negative. I mean, what can you do in just 1 year or maybe 2 years? Basically, you need much longer time to conduct, structural transformation. So obviously, this, quick change, which came about before Mr. Abe became Prime Minister was certainly a negative issue for the Japanese politics as a whole. So we really, I think, need to change this kind of trend. Unfortunately, Mr. Scott decided to step down because of this very difficult situation because of COVID-19. But, whoever it was, it would have been very, very difficult. So I think it's very unfortunate that, he would have to leave in just 1 year.
You're watching CGTN. Still to come, a new dawn for the DAX. We'll explain the historic changes to Germany's flagship index.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to the Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London. Who connect, interact, and inquire to bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Welcome back. Do remember that CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms. On Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app. And in the UK, we're available 24 hours a day on Freeview.
Germany's flagship stock index is undergoing the biggest shake-up in its history. It follows the Wirecard scandal, where $2 billion vanished from the payments company. CGTN's Ryan Thompson is outside the German stock exchange in Frankfurt. Hey there, Ryan. So what are the key changes?
Hi there, Paul. Well, 40 is the new 30. For the first time ever, this key European index will add 10 new companies, expanding it from 30 to 40, and really in an effort to reflect the diversity of the German economy. We don't know exactly the companies just yet, but we really expect them to reflect a desire to bring in some younger companies and expand the reach here. Because over the course of the many decades that the DAX Blue Chip Index has been around, it started focused on banking and chemicals. Over the past few years, it's included auto industry and pharmaceutical companies, but at this current point there's only one technology company on it, one software company, SAP, and so they really want to widen the gap to include a more modern picture of the German economy. Another big change that they also are bringing in, it's a profitability requirement. They want to see that these companies are staying in the black, so companies will have to post 2 years of positive earnings and stay on that course if they want to get in the club.
So, as I was saying, this comes after one of the biggest corporate scandals in German history. Will these changes help draw a line under the Wirecard saga?
Well, Paul, to answer your question, the Deutsche Börse Group, which runs the DAX index, certainly hopes so. Of course, all of these changes are 100% a reflection of the Wirecard scandal, which cast quite a shadow on this elite German business group. The decision has really been a response to a PR crisis that they've been facing for a couple of years now, where they consulted with hundreds of investment groups and asked them what kind of changes that they would like to see post-Wirecard on this blue chip index. The ideas were quite wide in terms of government regulation, in terms of more of an environmental footprint. This happens to be one of the least controversial decisions that they actually could have taken, but in the end, it is a step forward. It will include a lot more technology in younger companies and hopefully reflect a better picture of the German economy.
Thanks so much, Ryan. Ryan Thompson in Frankfurt.
The US economy created the fewest jobs in 7 months in August. That's as hiring in the leisure and hospitality sector stalled following a rise in COVID infections. Let's talk now to John Terrett, who joins us live from New York. So, John, the jobs report was way off expectations.
I know. I mean, honestly, it's almost laughable. It was an absolutely huge miss. It happened before, though. I think it was in April of this year we had another huge miss that we really weren't expecting. And I do wonder sometimes, honestly, Robin and Paul, if these economists, they really know what they're talking about when they put these numbers out, because this is really well off the mark. However, there was a precedent for this because the ADP report, which is the private jobs report, that always comes out on the Wednesday before the Friday, which this is with the government jobs report, that was a big miss as well. We were expecting something like 600,000 new jobs to be added in the private sector, and it was half that, basically. So the clue was there. Anyway, today, 235,000 jobs created in the month of August. We had been told to anticipate somewhere in the region of 725,000, so that's 490,000 fewer than the economists thought. Unemployment rate, though, that's good, down to 5.2%. So that was down a little bit this time around. 5.2% is good. Now, the Delta, when I was on the air with Beijing earlier, I blamed the Delta variant, and I thought that's what it would be. And now we have some proof to back that up, because President Joe Biden came out within an hour or two of the figures coming out, and he did two things. He promised an announcement on trying to tamp down this Delta variant sometime next week, but he also said that the disappointing jobs report was down to Delta. Let's take a listen to this rather long soundbite now.
Today's report shows that the steps we've taken, passing the rescue plan and vaccinating 175 million people, make our economy capable of growing and adding jobs even in the face of this continuing Delta surge. A strength in our economy very different from the way things were last winter. There's no question the Delta variant is why today's job report isn't stronger. I know people were looking, and I was hoping for a higher number. But next week, I'll lay out the next steps that we're going to need to combat the Delta variant.
So that's the president speaking within the last couple of hours. Now, what is the central bank, the Federal Reserve, to do about this? And the answer, I suspect, is absolutely nothing. They are going to just sit on their hands. And they're hostage to this data. I don't remember a time when I've really seen it quite like this before. The Federal Reserve is talking about tapering asset buying towards the end of the year, all that. So it's all very good, fine talk, but they don't know any more than I do. That's the truth. And one other thing that you should know, this weekend, 10 million Americans will lose their benefits and their entitlements. So the Fed has to wrestle with that, has to wrestle with pretty strong corporate earnings, it has to wrestle with Delta, and when to begin tapering asset buying. So today's news means everything's on hold, Robin. Think of it like that.
So, John, we heard President Biden talking about the fight against the Delta variant, and as part of that, the US is investing in vaccine production.
Yes, I mean, not very much, but it's better than nothing. $3 billion, that's okay, isn't it? And it's really for the backroom boys and girls, the ancillary staff. I love that word, ancillary. It's one of my favorites. It means the support staff, really, the support products. Because when you are Pfizer or Moderna, you get all the credit for creating the vaccine, along with BioNTech from Germany, of course. But there's so many other companies that have to feed into that process. You know, the ingredients in the vaccine itself, there are many of them. And then on top of that, tubing and needles and wrapping and labels and containers, all that sort of stuff needs to be brought in if you're to create a vaccine like they have. The White House hasn't named any firms that the money is going to specifically yet. They are sending, they say, more cash overseas as well. And they are working with COVAX to distribute the surplus of vaccines that we have in America around the world as fast as possible. No talk whatsoever of these companies giving up their patents. And just one quick other story for you here. Dr. Anthony Fauci, he's the guru who looks after COVID-19 in America on behalf of the administration, now, along with the World Health Organization, very worried about a new variant called Mu, which is a funny name. It's MU. It was first spotted in Colombia back in January. And it is another variant, I'm afraid, although it doesn't spread as fast as Delta, we are told. Robin and Paul.
John, good to talk to you. John Terrett there in New York.
AstraZeneca and the European Commission have settled their row over the delivery of 200 million COVID vaccines. The EU faced shortages earlier this year as member states, under pressure to speed up their vaccine programs, scrambled for jabs. AstraZeneca has now committed to delivering 60 million doses by the end of the third quarter of this year, 75 million by the end of the fourth quarter, and 65 million by the end of the first quarter of next year.
Norway's $1.4 trillion wealth fund has excluded India's top oil producer from its portfolio. The world's largest sovereign fund has raised concerns over oil and natural gas corps' business in South Sudan. It says the Indian firm has accepted the risk of contributing to abuse to enable oil production in the African country. The fund's also excluded 3 Israeli firms because of their links to settlements in the West Bank.
Apple is delaying the rollout of child safety measures after a backlash from privacy advocates. The new features would have allowed it to scan users' iPhones to detect child pornography, but the measures were criticised for allowing the company to look at private data and report it to authorities. The tech giant says it's decided to take more time to collect feedback and make improvements.
China's top chip maker, SMIC, says it will spend about $9 billion to build a new factory in Shanghai. The country is running very low on advanced microchips after a US ban on many sales to China. The expansion adds to existing plans for new chip plants in Beijing and Shenzhen.
And Stephen Cole will be looking at the global shortage of semiconductors on the agenda this weekend here on CGTN. Waiting times for vital chips are continuing to grow, largely thanks to the pandemic-enforced factory shutdowns, making existing supply chain issues worse.
But as Professor Rana Mitter, director of Oxford University's China Centre, tells Stephen, there's a bigger geopolitical struggle at play here too.
COVID pandemic, Stephen, is a very important factor, and it's clearly massively disrupted supply chains in all sorts of areas. But the geopolitics of this is becoming more and more important as well. When it comes to technology, the United States and China, as two countries, both of which have very strong indigenous tech sectors, are finding that the opportunities for cooperation are becoming fewer, and the sense that they're in competition with each other is becoming greater. So in that sense, semiconductors, which of course are one of the most important components of pretty much all technologies that involve essentially most elements of modern technology, are becoming more and more of an area where both sides feel that cooperation is very difficult. And since the production of semiconductors is one of the areas at the moment where China so far does not have really high quality indigenous production, that's a problem in that sense.
The agenda with Stephen Cole this weekend here on CGTN.
Stay with us on CGTN. Still to come on Global Business, Chinese President Xi Jinping addresses a major economic forum as the event gets underway in Russia.
The EU's digital COVID certificate, which offers the promise of unlocking hassle-free travel around Europe this summer.
In less than 2 weeks' time, the Czech border will also open to all EU and Serbian citizens. 4.4 million Hungarians received their first dose of COVID vaccine.
18 and over can receive the COVID-19 vaccination, but it does come with conditions.
Third wave will probably take longer to emerge. This vaccination centre is part of a massive effort to try and drive down the numbers of the new variant that was first identified in India.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas. Nothing can stop an idea whose time has come, and this idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very busy when we're trying to save the world.
Oh, no.
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
The fight against poverty has suffered a setback.
We are at a turning point in history.
There's a world under great distress and disruption.
But solving the crisis is still possible.
Change is indeed coming.
Join me, Stephen Cole, for a special one-hour-long show here on CGTN where we speak to some of the world's top leaders and experts standing on the front line of the fight against poverty.
It's a real mistake to think that the future is decided for us. We need dialogue.
We'll spark debate.
The biggest challenge is addressing inequality.
We'll explore the solutions.
This can be done, but it requires everybody working together.
And we'll showcase the success stories to reveal how the cycle of poverty can be broken. Innovation, action, change. Only on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Paul Barber and me, Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. The Taliban prepares to announce its new government as fighting intensifies in the rebel Panjshir Valley.
Japan loses its leader. Yoshihide Suga says he will step down as Prime Minister as his approval rating hits rock bottom.
And a shock from the US job market. New employment figures fall far short of expectations, sending the Dow into the red.
Chinese President Xi Jinping says that Beijing is ready to work with all parties to uphold multilateralism. He was speaking via video link at the opening ceremony of the Eastern Economic Forum in Vladivostok, hosted by Russian President Vladimir Putin.
The event brings together representatives from countries in the region and lasts until Saturday. In his speech, President Xi noted how the international landscape is changing with frequent COVID flare-ups and that the world still faces the daunting task of economic recovery.
We need to redouble our efforts to advance mutually beneficial cooperation. We need to deepen the collaboration between the Belt and Road Initiative and the Eurasian Economic Union, support the innovative development of the digital economy, jointly tackle climate change, and promote regional, social and economic development.
Let's talk now to Stuart Smith, who's in Moscow for us. So, Stuart, tell us more about the forum.
Well, we heard today from, of course, Russian President Vladimir Putin, but also the Mongolian and Kazakh president, and we heard a pre-recorded video from Chinese President Xi Jinping and Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, showing just that although this event is about Russia's Far East, on the face of it, it's really all about foreign direct investment in the Far East. And this has increased, doubled almost, in the 5 years since this forum has been taking place in Vladivostok, which shows exactly how important this area is for Russia in terms of trying to develop develop relations and trade agreements with its partners in the east. There's all sorts going on, according to President Putin, in the Far East: aviation, shipping, logistics, agriculture, digital technologies, and in particular he focused on his plenary speech with energy, and in particular the energy transition. For President Putin and Russia, the Far East is a catalyst for the developments that can be made going ahead with Russia's energy transition, trying to move from oil and gas. He mentioned such technologies as wave power, hydropower, nuclear power, and hydrogen, trying to make use of the hydrogen, the ability to make hydrogen in the region, and cooperating with China and Japan on that. He also talked about the issues in the Far East with logistics. It's one of the things that makes e-commerce very hard, and only the COVID-19 pandemic really sparking this new wave of online shopping, which is fantastic for the Far Eastern region because it's so close to China. But in particular, he mentioned an issue with trade routes and getting materials from China to Russia and vice versa. Shipping, transport, shipping, trains and road were the things he focused on, and this is what he said earlier on the issue of transportation.
We need to carefully but swiftly assess the prospects for such a transport corridor. This is an extremely important thing. We should definitely do it, and we will do it in the end. The port infrastructure needs to be worked out technologically and equipped, but it's certainly the future for shipping from Europe to Asia and vice versa.
Now, this was a recurring theme across a lot of the speakers today, including the Kazakh president, who noted in his speech to the Economic Forum that the railroad going between China and Europe was now not only doing very well in terms of trade goods coming from China to Europe, but it's seeing a shift in that now trade is coming back the other way as well. Essential for this project to go ahead.
Stuart Smith in Moscow, many thanks.
A new COVID variant, first detected in South Africa, is being closely watched by scientists despite its low rate of infection. The variant, named C.1.2, is being investigated to see if it is able to evade vaccines. Well, Penny Moore is the South African Research Chair of Virus-Host Dynamics at the University of Witwatersrand. I asked her how and when the variant was first discovered.
It was first picked up through routine genomic surveillance in about May of this year in South Africa. We've been tracking it ever since. It's present in about 2 to 3% of infections in South Africa. So important to point out it's at really low levels at this stage. It shares a number of mutations with other variants of concern, and so we have some idea what those mutations might do. But in addition, has several other mutations that have not yet been seen, not yet been explored experimentally. So we're looking at those at the moment.
And does that explain why the WHO has not categorised it yet or said it's of interest or of concern?
No, the WHO has very defined rules for what constitutes a variant of concern. In part, that is the identification of mutations in the spike region, often that are associated with a known phenotype that is concerning to us. But coupled to that is the spread of a potential variant across a larger area. So either responsible for almost all infections in a given area or detected at relatively high levels across the world. At this stage, given the very low numbers of infections caused by C.1.2, it doesn't meet the criteria for either a variant of concern or a variant of interest.
Delta still the dominant strain then of concern worldwide. Israel has had a steep rise, and researchers there have indicated that it may be linked to waning effectiveness of COVID vaccines. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, it's difficult to know. It depends on the vaccine to some extent. It may be related to durability. In some cases, there are going to be breakthrough infections even in vaccinated populations, and we may be picking up more of those breakthrough infections as time goes on. Importantly, most of those infections have been mild, and that's the thing that we need to understand is even though there may be breakthrough infections in vaccinated individuals, those tend to be much milder clinically.
And what else are we learning about the vaccines and other tools to fight off the virus?
Well, I think the most important thing is that regardless of the emergence of these variants, and I think we need to understand that these variants will continue to emerge until we get the number of infections globally under control. But despite the emergence of these variants, the vaccines have shown to be pretty robust in terms of preventing either severe disease or hospitalization by variants, regardless of the vaccine.
Australia's vaccination programme has received a boost after a slow start. The country will receive an extra 4 million doses of Pfizer's coronavirus jab in a swap deal with Britain. The agreement doubles the availability of Pfizer vaccines there this month and comes amid a record surge in cases. Australia reported its biggest daily rise in COVID infections on Friday, with almost 1,700 new cases and 13 deaths.
A violent extremist has been shot dead by police in New Zealand after stabbing multiple people in a supermarket. At least 6 people were wounded by the Sri Lankan national, who was known to be sympathetic to the so-called Islamic State group. 3 of the injured are in a critical condition. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern said the man had been monitored for around 5 years, having arrived in New Zealand in 2011.
Individual was under constant monitoring, and it was the police surveillance team and special tactics group who were part of that monitoring and surveillance that shot and killed him within, I'm told, the space of roughly 60 seconds of the attack starting.
We will not forget you. That was the message from outgoing German Chancellor Angela Merkel as she toured the western region affected by July's deadly floods, which killed at least 184 people. Her visit, which will continue over the weekend, comes ahead of the parliamentary election at the end of the month, which will decide her successor. Support for Merkel's CDU party has waned in recent weeks.
Still ahead here on CGTN.
This is Hungary's 3rd largest lake, but climate change is causing it to disappear. We'll show you the impact it's having on the people and animals that live here.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you. All around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello there, welcome back. 12 million children in France went back to school on Thursday after the summer holidays. That's as the country starts to see an easing of its 4th wave of COVID-19 cases. Ross Cullen reports from Paris.
Back to school after the summer. Children returning to their desks after the traditional August vacation. But COVID-19 disruption has not disappeared, and the top teachers union argues that the health protocols in schools are not best adapted to the situation. Those protocols include compulsory face masks for all children and a mass saliva testing plan for pupils too young to get vaccinated. On a visit to a school in Marseille on Thursday, the president was booed as he arrived. Ministers trying to reassure families that the start of the new academic year would be as normal as possible.
It was harder, I think, a year before or even at the beginning of the crisis, because at those moments you had a lot of struggles against the idea of reopening the school. At this moment we had not the vaccine. Now we have the vaccine, so it's a third card in our strategy. And so we have sometimes debates about some factors, but I think that we are in a stronger position now to open the school.
One area of COVID-19 strategy where France has been a leader is in vaccinating youngsters. It started jabbing the under-18s in June, a move which the government hoped would provide more protection as schools reopen. More than a third of French teenagers are now fully vaccinated.
For me, it's a relief to have the vaccine for going back to school so we can meet our classmates and have in-person lessons again. It's true that distance learning wasn't easy for everyone, and I think it's a relief and we hope that it will work.
I got vaccinated to get a health pass to go to the theatre or a museum. My friends all did the same, so we can do things and not be stuck at home.
With millions of children like this teenager now back in school, there are fears there could be a fifth wave of COVID-19 cases. But the lead doctor at this vaccination centre in the eastern Paris suburbs does not specifically fear another surge of coronavirus infections, but rather he regrets the confusion surrounding the safety and efficacy of COVID-19 shots.
I think that there has been very poor communication in regards to the vaccine, the point of the vaccine, how it works, and why it's important to get vaccinated.
France closed schools in the first lockdown in spring last year and for a 2-week period in spring this year. Apart from that, the government has kept them open, and it's maintaining that position this year, hoping to close as few classes as possible. Ross Cullen, CGTN, Paris.
China's primary and middle schools have opened in most parts of the country, but this term is set to be different.
The country is enforcing its so-called double reduction campaign to ease the burden of students' homework. Chen Tong visited a middle school in Shanghai to see how things have changed.
This is the first after-school session of the new term. All the students are asked to finish their homework during this period, with teachers on hand to answer questions. And that means almost no homework to bring home.
It took me half an hour to finish all the written homework at school. I finished everything at school yesterday and played with my brother when I got home.
Shanghai's Yan'an Middle School has offered after-school services for more than a decade, but they were not compulsory. Now students are all asked to finish their homework during this session, which has taken the pressure off for students and parents alike.
Homework causes friction between children and their parents, and so it ends up taking longer. If children can finish homework under the guidance of teachers at school, it's great news for us parents.
Here in Shanghai, one of the crucial parts of the so-called double reduction plan is to reduce the amount of homework for students. And the aim to do that is to make sure students will have enough time for their extracurricular activities. Shanghai's Education Commission has forbidden schools from assigning any written homework to first and second grade students. The average time spent on homework for students from grades 3 to 5 must not exceed 60 minutes. The limit for middle school students is 90 minutes. Parents and students are all happier. The next question is how to make sure the amount of homework is appropriate.
90 minutes refers to the average time for most students to complete the tasks. Our lesson preparation group will adjust the amount of homework as we continue.
Reduction in homework is one thing, but Yan'an Middle School also plans to make homework more diversified. More creative homework will be introduced to train students' hands-on capabilities. And schools will also offer extracurricular activities like sports and painting. Chen Tong, CGTN, Shanghai.
Europe.cgtn.com has all the week's top stories from China. Here's a quick take of some of them. All that and more at europe.cgtn.com.
One of Hungary's largest lakes is at the centre of an environmental crisis, with its water level dropping from 180 centimetres to less than 80 in the last 2 years.
It's affected water quality and the tourism industry, while wildlife is struggling to survive. Penelope Liersch has more.
Lake Valenza is Hungary's third largest natural lake, but it's beginning to disappear. The water levels falling by more than half in the last 2 years. Lower levels can lead to decreased oxygen and affect water quality. 4 beaches were briefly closed in July, while in June tons of fish turned up dead. Activists say the entire ecosystem is being affected.
Protected bird species are not disappearing, they're just moving away. Fish die-offs are bad for birds. They eat the fish bodies because they are hungry. A lot of seagulls have died.
Average rainfall in the area has dropped by around 50%, and hot weather can cause up to a centimetre of water to evaporate each day. This year, Hungary recorded its hottest summer since 1901, with 4 heat waves by early August. Looking at the dry ground around the lake, it's easy to see the effect increased temperatures are having. Tourism businesses have felt the impact, with some blaming media reports for scaring away customers. But for those who are visiting, the lack of water is concerning.
As we were walking along, I saw a man standing inside the lake with the water up to his knees, 30 meters from the shore. If the water level goes any lower than that, there will be no lake here.
Activists say the water needs to be replenished, but 2 reservoirs that once fed the lake are unusable. Authorities say the reserves are polluted. Residents believe it's because fish are being bred there. The Water Authority is hopeful the levels will return naturally.
Lake Valence is an area that dries up every 100 to 150 years. Unfortunately now, in the short term, we can only hope that autumn and winter rainfall will make a difference.
If the rain doesn't come, tourists and wildlife may not be back next summer. Penelope Liersch, CGTN, Lake Valenza.
The plight of refugees around the world is being highlighted by the journey of a giant puppet. Nicknamed Little Amal, the 12-foot wooden structure is being made to walk across Europe in the steps of the thousands who've made the journey since the outbreak of the Syrian conflict. Beginning in Turkey, Amal is heading 8,000 kilometres across Greece, Italy and France before reaching the UK. More at europe.cgtn.com.
Finally, a weed ram with a big price tag is heading to Hong Kong. Scottish independent whisky maker Gordon and MacPhail claim this is the world's oldest bottled single malt. Auction house Sotheby's says it could fetch more than $200,000 when it goes on sale next month in China. The 80-year-old whisky was distilled at the Glenlivet distillery in northern Scotland, commonly known by whisky lovers as the Speyside region.
When the tree to make the cask was harvested, Queen Victoria was a newlywed, Tsar Nicholas I ruled Russia, and Abraham Lincoln was a young lawyer. Award-winning architect Sir David Adaye has designed a matching decanter and oak container. He says the whisky is beyond drinkable, it's sublime.
The headlines again. The Taliban prepares to announce its new government as fighting intensifies in the rebel Panjshir Valley.
Japan loses its leader. Yoshihide Suga says he will step down as Prime Minister as his approval rating hits rock bottom.
And a shock from the US job market. New employment figures fall far short of expectations, sending the Dow into the red.
Well, that's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching. More on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps like Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV. Also on YouTube and Dailymotion, as well as CGTN.com and the CGTN app. Also in the UK, 24 hours a day on Freeview. Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We're back on Monday. Till then, from all of us in London, have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.